what is page object overall? So I prepared a few slides for you, and let me show you those. As a high-level definition for this concept, it is a design pattern used in test automation to organize source code, improve maintainability and reusability of the code. So you see, it is a kind of very high-level concept. And the core idea is this one, that with the page objects, you take the repetitive parts of your code, put them into the functions or methods, and then instead of calling the steps directly, you call the method that implemented those steps. So that way you reduce the number of lines of code in your project, improve reusability because you don't need to copy paste the code anymore, and maintainability as well. When you need to update your test, you just update the implementation of the method instead of implementation in every single test. But the truth is that there is no industry implemented standard for the page object model. There are hundreds and thousands of engineers who has own flavor of the page objects. Some using not page object model, some calling this page object functions, or even concepts like app actions. Some engineers can keep their locators inside of the methods. Some of them keep them in the constructor. Some of them put them as a constants. Some of them like to put the locators as a JSON files, and some add locators into CSV files. And there are tons and tons of flavors about the page objects. But the general high-level concept for the page object would sound like this. So core concept is this, that every page of the web application has own class with a methods, functions responsible for operations on this page. So that's a high-level concept. And then from this high-level concept, you can go sideways, deciding how exactly to build the framework architecture. And there are no rights or wrongs about the page objects. It's just a matter of preference and kind of what makes sense in the context of the existing project. So let me show you one of the example where do we need a page objects. For example, we have a login page, email, password, and login button. And let's say you have two tests where you need to log into your application, right? So you have some code before, some step before, then you type email, type password, login, and then some code after that. And for every test, you technically need to copy paste these 3 lines of Cypress code because you need to log into your application, right? Not optimal way at all, because if something will be changed on this login page, for example, placeholder or maybe login button will change the name from login to sign in, and then you will need to go and change this login to sign in all of your tests. Not optimal at all. And also, test is actually harder to read when it is like this because you have a lot of code with many steps. Instead, you can create an object of the login page and create a method that will be responsible for login operation. And it would look like this. So you would create a method and calling it perform login. So method is well descriptive and telling what it is doing. And you're putting all those steps inside of this method. And then instead of calling the steps to log into your application in the test, you call the method that reference to all those steps. And it looks like this. On login page, perform login. And the same for the test too. And you see the 3 lines of code inside of the test reduce just a single line of code. It is very descriptive. You can read this code clearly on the login page, perform login. And if something will have to be changed later, for example, login button will be changed to sign in button, you can go to just a perform login method, change it in a single place, and it will be applied automatically to all of your tests. So that's the core concept. Moving on. There are 2 important principles when you design the page objects that you have to follow. Principle number 1, called DRY, which is acronym for don't repeat yourself. And that means that if you copy pasting the code, if you copy pasting some of your code more than 3 times, it means that you probably need to stop there and think how you can create a reusable method or function that can be used in your test instead of copy pasting this code. And the second principle is a kind of opposite from the principle number 1, which is KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. And maybe it sounds strange, but it's actually very easy to overcomplicate the framework design. It is much harder to keep your code simple, clear, and understandable. New engineers who learn first design patterns and how code can be organized are super excited about those concepts and start like overbuilding methods, classes, helper functions, different, I don't know, whatever util classes you may need. And that create framework just like look cool, but hard to use. So don't fall into this trap. So trust me, keeping the code simple and easy to use, it's actually not bad. Simple code is easier to maintain and easier to onboard new engineers. For example, if you hand over this framework to a new engineer who came to the company, if this framework is clearly to understand, most likely that this person keep using this framework, keep developing this framework, updating it, and so on. But the worst thing that can happen with your framework, if you spend a year developing test automation framework, in your eyes it looks super cool, so modern, and so on, and then you hand it over to a new person just cannot use it just because it's too complex. And what this person does is just removes your framework and start from scratch. So if this happened, it means that your test design failed. So guys, keep your framework as simple as only possible. Okay, and the two useful practices. So the practice number one is descriptive naming. So naming in the computer programming, believe it or not, is the hardest thing to do. So avoid shortcutting, acronyms, and all that stuff in method naming, class naming, variables, functions, and so on. So instead of click login method, create click login button. Well, descriptive method name that exactly says what is it doing. If you're not sure about method name, create the method name, tap the shoulder for your colleague and show me, hey, look at this method name. Does this method makes sense? Can you recommend any other more meaningful name for this scenario? Give the person to read your test scenario and ask, hey, is it clear from the test scenario and the names of the methods what this test scenario is about? So keep attention on the clear naming. And the second thing is the avoid tiny methods. So methods like click login button that inside has just a single line that's just button login click, and that's all what this method is doing. I don't mean that don't create methods like that. I'm just saying that try to avoid it. So if you can put more steps or more meaningful implementation into your method, try to group several meaningful steps of your test scenario into the methods, so your code will be not that bloated and your class will not have 50 tiny methods and you quickly get lost what those methods are doing. So try to group them meaningfully to make sense. If you need to create a method like this, okay, do it. But if you can avoid it and group your test steps into more bigger methods that would do some certain functionality on your page, better do this way. And that's it about the core concepts of page object models. And in the next lesson, we will start building our first page object. So I'll see you in the next lesson.